Today we're in Genesis chapter 4, verse 2, and in the prior verse we saw that Adam and Eve conceive, and Eve gives birth to her first son, Cain. Now we're going to see the sequel to that. Ke pras etheken tekain ton adelphon altu ton abel, ke agenita abel poimen probaton, Cain de ein ergazamenos tain gain. Well, let's start with this first verb, pros etheken. Of course, we see the kai, so now we're continuing. But the first verb is from prostithemi. And even though it does have a kappa, if you recall with these athematic me verbs, often the aorist form will have that kappa as well. So this happens to be a third singular aorist, active indicative. And technically, prostithemi means to add to, like I'm going to add to something. But in the underlying Hebrew, they're the same basic word often means something to the effect of to continue to do something, which is related to adding to. And the Greek often will do that. So prostithemi is often used in this way for a continuation of something. And so she continued, or she added to, but continued is going to make more sense. Tekain, this is also from tikto. We saw that in verse 1. This means to give birth. And with this ending, the ein, this is an aorist active infinitive here. You see the spelling change to the tek. And so what we have here is actually a complementary structure. And so the infinitive here, tekain, or from tikto, is completing the prostithemi. So she continued to give birth. So she added another child, really, if you will. And she gave birth to the adelphon, so the brother. And notice we have an altu here. This is, of course, referring back to Cain in the prior verse. And so what I find interesting about the way this is narrated is that before we even know the name of this brother, his identity initially is framed as his, that is Cain's brother. And that, of course, is going to become quite significant when we see what their interactions are going to be as adults. We found out his name, which is Abel. And then we find out, we kind of skip forward many years. The compression of the narrative is quite significant. We don't know anything about their childhoods or anything like that. But we have agenita. This, of course, is from ginomai, a third singular aorist, middle indicative from ginomai. And Abel became. Poimen here is a shepherd. Pretty standard word of sheep. Probaton there, you see the plural. So probata is sheep, so probaton is sheep, plural. And then what about Cain? So Cain dad, notice the contrast, ein ergazamenos. So ein here is, of course, the imperfect of ein me, if you recall, third singular, so was. Then what about ergazamenos? This is from ergazomai, and you can see with the menos ending, this is a nominative singular masculine, present middle participle. When you put those two together, this is called a periphrastic construction. So it's kind of fun that we had a complementary infinitive here, and now we have a periphrastic construction. If you recall, this is a form of to be plus a participle. And it's kind of a roundabout way of describing a verbal sense. So he was working, that's what ergazomai means, tain gain. Now, why would the translator here choose a imperfective ein plus an imperfective ergazamenos? Why would you do a periphrastic construction here? Well, in some sense, what we're trying to convey is that both of these men are in the middle of doing their working, although it's in this situation on that final line, it's referring only to Cain. But the idea is we have a double imperfective background. They're in the midst of doing their thing. That's what the narrator is trying to get us to see. He was working the earth, and by implication, Abel was shepherding sheep. And that is really a deft way, a very good way in Greek of sketching the narrative background. Really what he's doing is he's linking the birth of these two sons with the next scene. What's going to happen? What's the next big thing that's going to take place in the narrative? And one way you can accomplish that is by backgrounding this verb through this imperfective periphrastic construction. Say, okay, now I'm moving this to the background because I want a different foreground to come into view, which of course is going to be their whole interaction over their sacrifices. And not to spoiler alert too much, one of them is going to, of course, get killed. So kind of just an interesting way to draw attention to why you might see a periphrastic construction like that. What is it doing for the narrative? And it pivots us from one scene to the next by pushing this to the background. And then we're going to see some verbs kick in. So interesting stuff here in Genesis 4:2.